But that strikes me as also very inconsistent or odd in that Goldman had these AAA ratings on these securities. Of course, they got them from ratings agencies, but that's
they always hedge their bet. I mean, sure, they're out here selling them, but then they also mention, there might be a problem, irrational exuberance down the road. So, oops, see, I told you so. Oh, look, all my competition's destroyed now. Oh, look, I'm making record profits. Oh, look, we're so noble. We happen to have our people all over federal regulation systems. Ooh, man, we're becoming the only player now. Gee, we sure screwed up. We sure screwed up into all this money and power.
And, the thing about they always hedge their bets, these were AAA. And I asked Goldman Sachs, can you give me another example of AAA securities that you hedged like this? And they did not provide such an example. They said we hedge in a lot of our markets, et cetera. But to be betting the other way at the same time you're selling something as AAA, the question is, should they have told the investors we also are betting that the housing market's going to turn south? Because there was a risk factor right in. They list the risk factors in all the prospectuses which go to investors before and we're talking about, by the way, pension funds, insurance companies, foreign banks, union health and welfare funds, institutional investors. Goldman says it only sold these securities to institutional investors. So the question is, when they were peddling these things, why didn't they disclose that they were also betting the other way? And would the investors then still have purchased these securities if they knew that Goldman was betting that the housing market was going to turn south? Because one of the risk factors said, it could really impact these securities if the housing market, especially in California and Florida, where things were red hot and where usually about 40-45% of every bundle of securities that Goldman and others sold came from those states, or based on mortgages that were written in those states. And so what would have happened to the sales of these securities if Goldman had acknowledged to investors, had disclosed in formal filings with the SEC or in the circulars they passed around on the deals they did in the Cayman Islands? What would happen? Would they be able to make these sales? And that's a big question.
Well, here's an example. I have a gold sponsor, and I have the gold sponsor on the air, and I really believe gold was going to go up the last 6 years from $300 an ounce to $1,000, and it has.
You're a smart guy.
But it's simple. I tell people I believe this is great. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Nothing's a silver bullet. Silver and gold is as close as you get. But then if it came out that I was internally betting against gold to go down, which I believe is going to continue to go up for a while, if I was wrong, that'd be okay. But if it came out that I knew it was going to go down and I was telling people, oh, it's great, here, buy it, I could get in a lot of trouble for that. The question is, will Goldman Sachs get in trouble, or do they have so many of their people in regulatory positions and Larry Summers running the White House economic area that they're not going to get in trouble?
That's a good question.
Well, let's talk about that when we come back. Amazing series. I didn't know it was a series to show how stupid I am. I just read how Goldman secretly bet on the U.S. housing crash. These are big, thick, meaty, documented articles. These are not little skinny things. And then he's got another accompanying series of shorter pieces. Just really powerful info. And should Goldman Sachs get in trouble? We'll ask him when we get back. Greg Gordon, investigative journalist, McClatchy, Washington Bureau. And he's broken national investigative pieces for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, the Detroit News, United Press International. He broke major stories on 9/11, EPA scandals, just so many other issues. And he is here with us today. Okay, the question that I posed as we went into break was, does Goldman Sachs get in trouble for this? There's not even, that I know of, an investigation being done, and the SEC is filled with Goldman Sachs people. And I remember Paulson It's in my film, Fall of the Republic. He's up there testifying, and they say, you were at Goldman Sachs. How did you, Congressman Stern is asking him from Florida, how did you give your company money? And he goes, I got a waiver from, and he said, where'd you get a waiver from? And he said, I got a waiver from the Treasury Department, from himself. I mean, it's just, where does this go? Or do they just continue to get to write the rules? Because I interviewed a professor yesterday that you quote in your article, and he said that all of this is just continuing, that the same people that set all this up are just continuing, and so nothing's being reformed.
You're talking about Lawrence Kotlikoff of Boston University, I believe.
Yes.
And there are a lot of questions about, I'm not covering the reform process because I've been doing this, but there are a lot of questions about whether the right reforms are being done. Congress did create a commission to investigate the crash, the causes of the crash. We also have the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is trying very hard right now to make amends for really blowing the Bernie Madoff investigation for years. I mean, there just was a big Inspector General's report that came out last week that talked about at least 6 instances in which SEC investigators had right under their nose opportunities to expose this gigantic Ponzi scheme that has hurt so many people, and each time they missed it. They missed the obvious, failed to take the obvious investigative step that would have exposed the whole thing, and Madoff basically kept shaking his head saying, boy, I was lucky that time. So we're going to have to see whether the SEC, which right now under Mary Shapiro, its new chair, is going to look at Goldman and really at all the investment banks and whether or not they properly, fully disclosed what they knew about these risky mortgages. And the last piece of the series, I looked at Goldman's relationship with New Century Mortgage, a company that really was one of the classic high flyers in this sort of go-go industry. New Century in the mid-'90s was a pretty small company doing some subprime mortgages, which were a little bit riskier than the traditional mortgages, and maybe had about $300 million plus in sales. And a decade later, New Century's revenues approached $60 billion in 1 year, which is staggering. They were the number 2 behind AmeriQuest, and New Century had about 9 deals in which they sold, or their mortgages ended up in pools of securities that Goldman Sachs sold as high-yield bonds. And in addition, Goldman sold off New Century related securities offshore in at least 3 deals. So I tallied up about $5 billion plus in mortgages from New Century, and I think the number's a bit higher, and maybe quite a bit higher, that Goldman was peddling after converting them into bonds or other securities. And New Century, I got inside New Century. I looked at a 550-page federal bankruptcy examiner's report. By the way, the only one done on any defunct mortgage company from that era. And I got networked into a bunch of former New Century employees, and they described how essentially all the lids were removed from the mortgage lending process late in this really red-hot housing market, right as it crested. That's when there weren't enough borrowers to keep up with the Wall Street demand. And so the lending criteria, the credit criteria, just began to become
yes.
It disappeared into thin air.
So this is systemic fraud from top to bottom. I mean, that's what it's been.
One of the things I just want to mention this, Alex, and that is that, like other Wall Street firms, Goldman hired contractors to look over these mortgages.
All right, stay there. We got a break. We got a break. Come back and explain that to us.
Okay.
And then we'll ask you about some other points in your series. They're going to destroy our society if we don't stop them. and that the fraud we've seen is by an order of magnitude the greatest in history. Those are quotes from Fall of the Republic, the new DVD film we just released 2 weeks ago, or less than 2 weeks ago. Get the DVD at Infowars.com. We have John Perkins in there, Webster Tarpley, a doctor of economics, and then also a doctor of history, all agreeing with the same documents, same material. And that's only 45 minutes of the 2-hour, 24-minute film. Covers the banking. So people and your friends and family, you can give them the film and they can really understand what's going on in this world, because this affects everybody. Doesn't matter if you own a stock or a bond. This affects your retirement. It affects your taxes. And the same system is still there. The same people that ran all this are still in positions of power. They control both the major parties, and it's just getting worse and worse.